Experience work interactions in a different and refreshing light. This is the Leader in You podcast, brought to you by EMC Leaders, taking care of the teams you care about, to share how you can build strong and connected relationships.
Welcome,
as well
everyone,
as a connected
to
culture.
the Leader in You podcast. Welcome back. We're so excited to be here. My name is Polina, and I am co-hosting this amazing podcast with my mom, Dr. Lola Gershfeld.
Hi, Polina. Hi, everyone. It's so nice to be here with you.
And today actually happens to be Earth Day, which is such an amazing coincidence that we are recording this podcast for today's episode, because we're going to be talking about how the process that we use in our workplace and to create a safe, emotionally safe team environment is literally going to shake up this earth, shake up this world, and create a better place. So today's conversation, we are going to talk about an incident that occurred when I was working at this company. So last podcast we recorded, we were talking about workplace incivility, and we were referencing actually the video that we watched called The Ripple Effects of Workplace Incivility. And I had shared an experience that occurred at a place that I was working for just for several months, very short period of time. And so didn't get a chance to really dive into the conflict so much. So actually, my mom thought it would be a great idea to dive into actually what happened and the details of the conflict and how I was able to de-escalate the situation and repair the conflict and injury that occurred with the customer that came into the store, but not so much the
Well, what I
other
liked about this
team
example is that
members.
here you are, a new person who comes in and you have the tools, you have the skills, and you're able to de-escalate and change the dynamics of that team where people do not have the skills, or even the company who is not really teaching you those skills. You are becoming a more of a leader, right? That this podcast is the leader in you, so you take the lead in de-escalating and also creating more safety for the customer and for the team members and also for your manager.
Yes, actually, the manager, in the moment that that happened, could not regulate his own emotions and got very triggered in the situation.
Why don't I rewind the tape and go back to the example that you were sharing?
Yeah, so the position I had at this company was it's a retail clothing company, and I was working on the retail floor. We had a customer come in that was obviously intoxicated. He had been drinking, and I could tell that from the way that he smelled. But he was very polite to me and just seemed like he was had some urgency, like he was trying to find some shirts to buy. The islands in particularly create these custom prints that are not available anywhere else in the mainland. And the gentleman was looking for a specific print that we didn't have. The guy came into the store and I greeted him and was talking with him and was looking for some items for him. When we didn't find any, so I said, like, let me ask the manager to see what we can do. So the manager came to show him, like, hey, we don't have this shirt, but we have this shirt. And the way that the manager said it triggered the customer. The customer got so upset at that moment that he couldn't get the items that he wanted. And also, the way that the manager spoke to the customer was kind of dismissive, like, that's all we could do for you. Like,
Mm.
we don't really have a solution, but it didn't come off that way, you know? The
It's
way that he
almost
said,
it's almost came off as the manager was a little bit of annoyed. Was he annoyed? Do you think he
he
was?
was annoyed, and I think he was I think he felt disrespected by the tone of voice and the way that the customer was talking to him.
Mhm.
And so right away, he was probably feeling not valued in that moment when he first came to talk with the customer. And because the manager was repeating himself, he repeated himself several times
Mhm.
in a way like, I told you we don't have that size and that print.
Mhm.
Like I said, sir. Like it was kind of like that tone where
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
he was like kind of putting him down in a way where the guy was like, listen, I really want this size and this color and this print, whatever. And the guy was like, I told you already we don't have that available. The
Mhm.
way that that manager came off became very aggressive, I think, to the customer, which made the customer feel like he wasn't important. I was actually surprised because I'm like this 5'5" woman, little woman. The customer was probably about 6 feet, but was a big muscular man. And then the manager was this like taller than both of us, you know, like 6'4" something,
Right, right.
and could not connect and help the customer feel important and cared for in that moment. He got like so triggered. And I guess as I'm saying this story and kind of reliving the situation, I think it's important to say that neither person was wrong. It's
Yeah.
not the manager did this bad or the customer shouldn't have been intoxicated or I mean, yeah, granted it would be easier. Probably, I don't know. I know that drinking typically causes someone to be frustrated easier, like to get triggered easier.
Mhm.
But the manager just really had no way of dealing with his own trigger and stress in that situation. So he got so quickly escalated, and that just like escalated the customer like times 100. So I remember now that when the manager came out and started having this interactions with the customer and got short with him and then got aggressive and then like it kind of went back and forth and it started to escalate, I kind of switched roles. I was kind of like the director in the entire store because everybody was like in so much shock what was going on. And I was like, okay, hold on. Like, and I was trying to calm the manager down at the same time as trying to calm the customer down. And I said, and yeah, and I was like, okay, it's okay. Because at one point, the manager was so upset. He was like, I'm going to go in the back of the room to cool down. Do you remember that? Like, he had to remove
He
himself
said,
from the
"Oh, I'm
situation.
going to remove myself from this
Yeah,
situation."
I'm going to remove myself from the situation. And Polina, you let me know if you need anything. And I was like, okay. I actually ended up getting like the customer gave me his business card because he was like, please, I'm so happy you were here. I ended up emailing them because they sent in like this complaint about the whole situation with the manager and then had talked about how well I diffused the situation and connected with them, made them feel important and seen and heard and all this stuff where the manager didn't know how to do that.
I want to stay with this because I think the steps on the process, you do it naturally. It's like
Probably because I
dancing.
have
You
so much.
naturally tune into the emotions, right? Into the music of the interaction. And now you kind of join them, each of them in their experience, and you try to help them to de-escalate by validating. What specifically did you do to de-escalate this?
Well, I think the very first thing was recognizing that the person was stressed. I already knew that from the beginning. And I also recognized that he was intoxicated. So I was like, okay, this is gonna I need to turn on my techniques to help make sure this person feels heard and validated. Because if I were to defend myself or start attacking him or criticizing him or making comments to him about like what was happening with him in the situation in a negative way, which is kind of what the manager did, then I'm like, okay, I need to be softer actually and have much more empathy for this person and then respond to like really try to understand what it is that they're looking for in a way they
Well,
feel. Yeah,
right, which
because
is but it's very interesting because what you're just really describing is the movie we saw on the Ripple is the manager pauses and says, well, I
Mhm.
can respond like this and shame the person that they made a mistake and then have all that ripple effect. Or I can tell them that it's okay for them, we'll fix it together. So, in a way, how is it possible that you were able to slow it down, able to recognize it, and then selecting, like making a choice in your mind saying, well, I can respond like this or I can respond like that? Why was it different from the manager, what the manager did?
That's such a great question. And I think that it's interesting. The way that I'm able to deal with that is to first have learned what my own triggers, have learned the self-awareness, that first step of bringing attention and understanding to what happens to you in situations that become difficult. Because prior to me learning about this process, I was conflict avoidant. I didn't want to have deal with any conflicts. And that comes a lot from shame and the fear of failure, the fear of not being right, the fear of looking bad. The first step before the thought of being able to respond to someone else's needs and even to be aware that there could be a situation here that needs to be handled differently, it's that awareness of what you do in this difficult situations and how you process your emotions and how you are able to identify what's going on with you. So, because that's what helps decrease the fear. The manager reacted that way because he's scared. He was scared probably of failing. He's scared probably of not doing the right thing. He's scared of the safety of his employees, probably the safety of his job. He probably doesn't have any secure attachment with his boss. He probably doesn't feel valued. So, like, all those fears get really exasperated in a situation where you have a conflict like this. So, you have those fears, and then they come up, and because you don't have those tools to have learned that those fears can be minimized and they could still be there. They could just be minimized and also dealt with in different ways, though they get like so exasperated and become the forefront of the conflict.
I want to go back because that's something really critical to that. You said in your learning experience, as you continue to learn about your triggers and your raw spots and the emotions, you expanded your knowledge. You expanded the terrain, the emotional terrain, so to speak. Like when the rubber band is stretched and it's flexible, it doesn't pop so quickly back because it's so stretched. And one more thing you said is secure attachment.
I think it's the ability, and we talked about this in the Incivility podcast, it's the ability to hold your fear and not let it take over or become the forefront of your experience. So you can still experience the fear in a conflict, but when you have those tools of understanding what happens to you and processing your experience in conflicts in your personal life and relationships and such, you can hold that fear. Then it doesn't become what takes over the situation. And that's what I think happened with the manager. He doesn't know how to hold his fear in a place where it doesn't have to become like such a big forefront in the conflict.
That's the muscle, right? You're saying that I have exercised my emotional muscle where I could hold that fear and not get escalated by that fear, not get overwhelmed by that fear. Am I getting it?
So I'll just take the feeling of shame, for example, because I feel like that was very prevalent in my life and growing up in my childhood. So if we have the feeling of shame, and the shame is have so much fear of feeling shame. We don't, that fear gets exasperated any time that there's like a slight cue that we're going to feel that feeling. What has happened to me was when you bring light to the feelings that are correlated to the fear that you're experiencing, then it's not as fearful anymore. It's not as scary anymore. It's yeah, like there's growth and there's learning and like the rubber band has stretched and become it's not as tight, but I don't feel that shame anymore related to that fear. So If I don't feel that shame anymore related to that fear, then there's more space to feel the ability to resolve or the ability to come forth in a conflict, as opposed to allowing that shame to stop you from accessing that fear.
And I like what you're saying. When you shine a light on that shame,
Yeah.
it's no longer fearful to look at the shame. You're not afraid of dealing with that shame.
Yeah, so like for example, you have your form, right? Like if we go to the form really quick, just because I think this is great way to just identify, for example, you go to the form and you go through the form in a conflict and you recognize it was the words or their facial expression or tone of voice or behavior, action, decision, step one, that prompted the disconnection. And let's say, like growing up your entire childhood, you're like, oh my God, I feel so ashamed and embarrassed of how I feel. It's so ridiculous. I can't believe that I felt that way. I can't even say it out loud because it's so embarrassing. It's like, I'd be weak and I'm gonna be like so little and not important to someone. So this is kind of the message that a lot of people get as they're growing up in their childhood and learning how to interact with their conflicts and their feelings. So you feel that shame, but then all of a sudden you share, oh, actually, the words or the decision or the action or the facial expression, that's what hurt you. So when you all of a sudden bring that light and attention to those moments where you felt shame to even talk about it, you're feeling validated, you talk about your raw spots, you feel heard, understood, and seen. All of a sudden, it's not like a problem. It's not this big fear of being ashamed anymore. So you can show up in a conflict even with fear. Like, yeah, there was still fear that maybe the situation was going to be escalated. My relationship with the manager and could be compromised in some way, but there's validity to your experience because you no longer experience that shame.
It fits perfectly because you're no longer as triggered as the manager. The manager, he still feels so much shame or
Yeah.
embarrassment, doesn't know how to control the situation. He's probably embarrassed on how he's behaving himself or the
Mm,
responses that coming out of his mouth. And he's getting more escalated, and he sees that the customer is getting more escalated as well.
yeah.
So, and he sees that all his employees are watching this. So the manager is getting triggered more and more.
So to go back to what you were asking me, you said, how did I know how to respond? If I wasn't aware, if I didn't have the process and didn't use the process to recognize my shame and the shame attached to the fears and to open up and discuss all of the triggers, my raw spots, my thoughts and behaviors, protective behaviors, if I didn't have that experience, then I would not be able to be aware of the situation that was going on. But because I used that experience to understand what was going on with me, then I had that awareness. It's kind of like, when you bring attention to how you feel after you eat certain foods. When you start to become attentive to how you feel, then you can make the change because then you start to feel it before you're actually making the change in what you're eating. So it's like you put that same thing together. So because of the self-awareness, which is like your first step in the process, then that made it very easy for me to identify what was going on and to quickly access the tools to de-escalate, regulate, and de-escalate.
Mhm.
So it becomes easy.
This is brilliant because over the years you practiced and I recognize the emotions. I mean, emotional understanding, that's a huge thing to even recognize what is happening. It's almost like you see the dance happening right in front of you. You see the negative pattern occurring as the manager and the customer talk to each other. And you start to recognize, okay, I need to de-escalate the situation. I have the tools. That you also said to yourself is nobody's as a bad guy. That's a big
Mhm.
step in the de-escalation, is to recognize it's a negative cycle. Nobody is doing anything specifically to hurt the other person, but they respond to their own triggers, what's going on for them.
But that only comes when you learn about yourself. You that really only comes the understanding that nobody is at fault or no one is the bad person is comes only when you learn what you're doing in difficult situations yourself.
Yes, you learned about your triggers, your raw spots, your emotions. You were able to articulate the fears that you have, the automatic thoughts, protective behaviors, and needs. And you were able to repair those disconnections, that the fears, the shame that you had in the past. And also, you learned through the process to identify that people get stuck in these negative cycle, not necessarily because they behave in a way on purpose to hurt you, but because they are responding to their own triggers.
Yeah, absolutely. I really feel like the self-awareness is what brings the attention to understanding how it makes sense that it's nobody's fault. Because when you become self-aware of how you respond, then it is like you all of a sudden have an increased amount of empathy, right? Because when you think back and you go back to the patterns and you start making sense of the patterns that you have in your life and your conflict techniques, those patterns were all created based off of the struggles that you experienced yourself. So when you identify and bring light to those struggles and can really like dive deep into understanding where those patterns came from, that's when you understand that it's not anyone's fault because they have those patterns because of their own struggles.
Mhm. Yeah, I think it's good. Yeah.
So I think it's important also to say that you can choose. Everybody has like different degrees, I feel, of
Tolerance, tolerance.
of tolerating on different and certain sensitivities. I just did a video actually, and I said, anyone has ever told you like you're so sensitive? Everybody is sensitive. Because then I was talking about this specific thing, like we are sensitive to different triggers. When we have those sensitivities to different triggers, then our response is different depending on those sensitivities. So when someone turns away and walks away, for example, I don't get sensitive as if somebody were to like falsely accuse me or talk about the other trying to change me, trying to change who I am. That's one of the sensitivities too.
Mm.
But I also think that depending on, you can tell by someone's ability to regulate and de-escalate, that is a sign of what the trauma they've been through, right? It's like when you see the way that they respond, you're like, oh wow, like that person went through a lot of trauma and that's
Mhm.
specific. So in some way, the manager had struggled. Maybe there was a past experience in the workplace where he got reprimanded for dealing with a situation, you know? Maybe he just, they do not educate and train the manager on these kinds of tools and how to de-escalate and regulate emotions of a customer or situation on the retail space. So maybe he didn't know and he just didn't want to make a mistake, do it wrong.
Yeah, there's a fear again, right? There's
Yeah.
the fear of failing, their fear of reprimanding, or maybe he already has the fear that the upper management or his boss will not be understanding or will blame him. It's always goes the ripple effect of that conflict. But remember what you did after when the customer left? Do you remember?
I went back to the manager's room to
Yeah.
talk to him to see how he's doing.
Actually, this is a very good step
Yeah.
because when withdrawers, when people who shut down or will walk away from the conversation as he did and he left, they leave the situation because they get overwhelmed. They don't know what to say. Took himself out, but it's very difficult for them to come back because they might still feel embarrassed and ashamed. So when you went back, you actually helped him to to be accepted to what was
Yeah.
happening for him.
But it was difficult for him to receive that, you know, it was difficult for him because I think as a manager, almost like he didn't want to get the support he needed from someone who was not a manager. I think I just asked him like, "Are you okay? Is everything okay?" And then, he went right to like blaming and
Mm.
shaming the person. And I was like, "Yeah, I understand. Yeah, it was really difficult. Like, I get it." And then it was kind of dismissive, like I think he was trying to take back his role as the manager, so giving me direction,
And what
which,
was interesting, I remember you kind of wished that he would acknowledge and appreciate what you did with the customer.
yeah, that was really interesting too, because even preceding that, when I got an email from the general manager and then the district manager, yeah, there was no acknowledgement for helping de-escalate the situation. Just like, these are the things you shouldn't be doing.
Right,
And these are
right.
the things you should be doing
Yeah.
next time.
Here again, when people lose their emotional balance, they're not really able to be there for the customer or for the employees to create
Right.
that emotional connection with them, with each other, and create emotional safety where people do feel valued and seen and appreciated for the effort that they have put in, as you have to
Yeah.
escalate the situation.
Yeah. And I think it takes a lot of, I guess it's emotional strength or emotional maturity or emotional intelligence to hold in a difficult situation, to hold your own feelings, right? I was like embarrassed the manager kind of went off that way. And even if the guy was a little bit over the top or had come off in a very strong way, it still was like, oh, okay, this is an interesting situation. Like I have to kind of shift the way that I deal with customer. And the manager was, well, that the conflict got escalated. That was difficult. And I think, yeah, the no acknowledgement and the no understanding of how difficult it is to hold that space and still be able to like deal with everyone at the same time. Yeah, that should have been acknowledged for sure.
Acknowledged, and also I think it should have been repaired because there was a disconnect between you and the manager after that. And
Yeah,
also for the team members, nobody really talked about it.
yeah.
Nobody had a chance to recap and rebrief of what have happened. How did it affect everybody else? So when people don't have the tools or the process, they don't even know how to deal with that conversation.
Yeah, and the manager probably felt very embarrassed already with the situation, and so he wanted to like avoid and like get over it or whatever. And even
Exactly.
though like all the employees were watching, the whole situation happened, I think everybody was scared, but I wasn't, and that's what was so interesting for people. Even some of the employees had told me, "You really handled that well." They were all
Right.
scared something was going to happen. And even like, do we need to call security or tell the man to leave or whatever? And I was like, it's fine. I got this handled. And so that was really interesting as well. I ended up leaving the company shortly after because, well, one of those reasons too was that I didn't feel like valued. You don't feel valued. And then there it comes the instability in the workplace where I can see how the performance would go down, then you're not as motivated to come to work, you're
Yeah.
not as excited, you're not as interested in connecting with the people and that sort of thing. So,
Yeah, no, that makes sense. It's a great example on how people really think about their own awareness. Like you said, I really like their own growth, their own style, and their own understanding about relationships and
yeah.
how they can learn and grow in that process.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I think you ended up writing an article, didn't you, about this whole
Yes, I did.
situation?
Uh-huh. Yes, I did.
I feel like we need to send it to the company now that I think about it. Give them like an analysis, like this is what happened. This is what
No,
went on.
it's a good case study, definitely.
Yeah, it was. It was definitely a good case study. Well,
But
maybe what I should
it's
do, I
nice.
should be like, who's that guy that goes into restaurants but like undercover?
Oh,
You know,
yeah.
and he talks about like all the things that go wrong in the restaurant,
Right, right.
recover something. And then and do that in all these different corporations, like get a job there and then do a case study on each of their
Uh-huh.
That would be good for a company to do, like a CEO to hire us. They hire us as an
Mhm.
employee
Yeah.
just to test out the company culture and to see like where, but we already know what's wrong. I guess we don't need to do that because we can already tell you that your company has toxic culture.
Well, from the way people interact to each other and the patterns they get stuck in, we know exactly what culture they are dealing with.
Which
Very
is
easy.
99.9% of the companies.
Companies, yes, that's
Yeah.
correct. That is correct. I watched your one of the posts that you made, and you
Mm,
said about children and the families, and you said in order to change family dynamics, you need to teach people how to deal with conflicts. And it
yes.
stuck with me because this is exactly what the culture is all about. Culture is how managers deal with conflicts.
Yes,
That's the
absolutely.
culture. That is a definition of defining your culture.
Absolutely. I agree. Well, this was great. And luckily, we have the tools, of course, to help in your situation. And anybody listening or watching this podcast, we are here to support you in your conflict resolution needs, making your team, the culture of your company from toxic to thriving, to shift the way you do business and the way that you work with relationships. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for watching. This is the Leader in You podcast, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, Polina.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you, everyone, for listening. It's a joy to share these podcasts with you. Be sure to check out our previous podcasts and subscribe to join us at our next podcast of The Leader in You, brought to you by EMC Leaders, taking care of the teams you care about. Until then, be well and be focused on your relationships. We'll see you soon.